Hi, my name is JL Marlor. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a composer, performer, um, rock star, and a teaching artist living in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm really excited to share a little bit about myself today. I'm going to kind of share the questions that are being asked and then just respond really fluidly and organically. So if I mess up my words, don't worry about it. This is an attempt for me to show my most authentic self and not really edit it too much, because as an artist, that is sort of my main goal here, is to be really authentic, really honest, and really unpolished. That is a big part of my work, to just be messy. So here I am. The first question is, what is my connection to Boston? I grew up in Beverly, Massachusetts, which is a town on the North Shore of Boston. It's a pretty wealthy and white community. I grew up on a street right on the water and had a pretty great childhood. I will say that I grew up in a really non-musical family. So my parents, my mom's a banker and my dad is a scientist. So they really did not know what to do with a super musical child. But I took to it really, really quickly. And pretty much from a young age, I knew that I wanted to do this for the rest of my life and knew that it was my biggest passion. When I was the story supposedly goes that when I was 3 years old, my parents, who were not super religious, took me to church, and I saw all the people singing, and I said, I really want to do that, Mom. I want to do that. And she spoke to the choir director and said, she really wants to do this, but she can't read. And the choir teacher just said, doesn't matter. She can come and hang out. So for the first, 10 years of my life until I was maybe 13, or like from 3 to 13, I sang in this church choir, not reading any music, just learning everything by ear. Yeah. And that was sort of my growing up musical experience. I stopped doing music for probably 5 years. When I was a child, I got pretty sick when I was 13. And I was in and out of hospitals from, I'd say, age 13 until age 16 or 17. So those were pretty formative years for me that I didn't spend around other kids. And I didn't make music, which was a really important part of myself. And I was not using it for those years. But what I did do in those years is I listened to a lot of audiobooks and stories. And I would just my friends would go to the library and bring me books on tape. And my mom got me a tape, like a cassette player, and I would just listen to stories and specifically like young adult novels, and just listen to people telling stories and get really engrossed in all the characters and just pretend my life was outside of the hospital room that I was in, or outside of like the sick bedroom that I was in. And I think that kind of planted a seed that I wanted to tell stories as an adult. And the way that I primarily do this is through music. I began my life as a composer. That was sort of like the beginning of my musical life, was hearing and seeing opera and wanting to sing it. I was a really strong singer. Like I said, I got my start in choirs, and I really wanted to keep singing because I just felt so passionate about it. But when I got to college, I realized that opera really wasn't something I was as interested in as I thought. I think it was there was like a prestige aspect to it. I thought it was like the best type of singing. And then I realized that wasn't really true for me, that it didn't really make me feel the way I wanted to feel when I sang. So that was, my first year of college, and I went to Smith College out in Western Mass. My first year of college was really formative in realizing that I didn't really want to sing opera, but I still wanted to be part of that world and tell those types of stories. So I was lucky enough in my first year of undergrad that a new faculty member joined the Smith College music department, and her name was Kate Soper, who is a classical composer. You should check out her work. She's an incredible and prolific opera composer, won a Guggenheim Fellowship, and she really opened my eyes up to what opera could be and what I could make, and made me realize that I wanted to make opera and stuff like opera for the rest of my life. So it was at Smith College that I composed my first opera ever. It's called Iskra. It was about Polish American coal miners during the turn of the century who were protesting against poor working conditions. This opera is not a great representation of my work, but it is a really important part of my story. So I don't really perform it anymore, nor do I encourage people to perform it, but it is a really interesting look into how I started composing and whatnot. Wow, I just really went into what my connection is to Boston. But my first jobs were in Boston. I worked for a company that owned like tour guiding companies in Boston. So I was like, 17, 18 years old being a tour guide on the Freedom Trail. And up on if anyone's ever been to Skywalk Boston, that's where I worked for years. Boston was, a second home for me, and I still have a lot of friends in Boston to this day. Yeah. So the next question is, what am I doing with music currently? I am doing a lot. Currently, I'm actually in grad school. I go to Mannes Conservatory, which is under the New School in New York City. I took a pretty sizable break in between undergrad and college because, well, to be honest, my undergrad experience was really difficult. I was in a very complicated department, and even though I had a wonderful mentor, Kate Soper, who really has been deeply important to me, I really felt like the department didn't really understand what I wanted to do because it was kind of outside of the norm of what they expected from a student. They wanted to see me singing opera. They wanted to see me doing arts administration or, focusing on more like traditional styles of composition. And I just wanted to do crazy things, and they didn't really understand it. So I really needed a big break. And during that time, that break time in between undergrad and my graduate program, I did a lot of things. I was really lucky. My first job as a composer was to be kind of the notator and songwriter for an off-Broadway brand new production called Riot Antigone, which was a Riot Girl retelling of the Antigone myth. And it was in those circles that I got to really hone my guitar playing skills. I took guitar as a kid because I thought I wanted to be Sheryl Crow when I grew up. So I took pretty rudimentary guitar, but my notation and dictation skills were quite good, and I just got recommended to this project as someone who could, listen to what was going on and then write it down in notation so that we could play from a score. And so I got signed to this program called Riot Antigone, and it totally changed my life. I met my best friends and my greatest collaborators, and that's where I started my indie rock project, Tender Heart Bitches. It's a really good story, so I'm just gonna go tell the story. So while I was in Riot Antigone, I was realizing that I was queer and realizing that I wasn't straight, and I was in a straight relationship, and I felt really wrong all the time. And one of my collaborators, who is an amazing producer and indie rocker in her own right, Maury Einseidler, she said to me, "Hey, Jess, why aren't you writing your story? Why aren't you writing, indie rock music? If you love it so much, if you're so passionate about it, if you are, passionate about writing music, why aren't you writing your story?" And I sort of said to her, I was like, I don't think anyone would care about my story. Also, it just felt really selfish. It felt like a really selfish act. I wanted to tell other people's stories. I wanted to make sure that stories that weren't heard were getting to, the opera stage or the theater stage, and I just thought mine didn't matter. But it sort of hit me right at this time where I was coming out, and it was a really difficult experience for me. It was very, very painful and very long. And I felt like I was uprooting my whole way of being. And so I ended up, it kind of felt like the only option for me to process my feelings was to write about them, to make music about them. And I remember having this conversation with Maury, why aren't you writing your own music? And going home and noodling around on my guitar, and ended up writing what would become our debut single, which we released in June, called Blood Orange. So after writing Blood Orange, my band Tender Heart Bitches really took a center stage in my life. I ended up writing 6 songs, and I'm sitting on about 30 songs, and we just released our debut album probably 3 weeks ago. It's called High Kicks. You should go check it out anywhere. It is an indie rock kind of retelling of my coming out story. So that's a big part of my life. I'm also a teaching artist, so I like to be really transparent about money and how composers can possibly make money. How I make most of my money is, to live, is being a teaching artist. So I work with programs throughout New York State to teach in either public school systems or in really specialized programs. So I teach with the New York Philharmonic in their Very Young Composers program, which helps, students from 4th grade to really pre-college learn how to compose for small ensembles and then for orchestras. But my passion is really teaching for kind of the next generation of composers. What I notice is that a lot of composers that are programmed are white or male or cis from privileged backgrounds, and it's really important to me to make sure that I am spending most of my time nurturing the lives of composers, of young composers and young people that are not from those demographics. So I work predominantly in sort of Title I schools and just really different programs. And, anytime I'm in a program and it feels particularly like it's adhering to the status quo of what classical music is, I sort of say, like, we need to find more kids. We need to work harder. So I work with the New York Philharmonic for their Very Young Composers program. I also work for American Composers Orchestra. I'm one of the designers of this program called Sonic Spark Lab, which is I'm really passionate about it. I think it's really cool. It's for musical code switchers. So kids who are really interested in one type of music and then maybe drawing, or one type of music and then, maybe a really different style of music. I straddle the worlds of new classical music and also of indie rock and punk rock. And so I spend a lot of my time kind of switching between those worlds. And so I like to, I work with American Composers Orchestra to kind of encourage and nurture students who are also interested in multiple areas of music or just multiple areas of art. I just finished my 3rd opera called Space Station 189, which is a micro opera. And I composed it using all vintage synthesizers. It's my first experience producing music. So I wrote it not in notation. I wrote it in Logic, which is a digital audio workspace. It's much like GarageBand, if you're familiar with that. And then afterwards, I notated it. But I'm still, I'm spending a lot of time these days working on my 2nd opera, which I finished composing at the beginning of 2020. It's an opera about the true story of Francesca Mann, who is a Polish-Jewish ballerina during the Second World War, who resisted Nazis by undressing in a distracting manner and then stealing their pistol and shooting them. So this is probably my biggest and most important opera, and it's set to premiere sometime this spring. I'm going to be in partnership with National Sawdust to premiere this piece, and also in partnership with the Polish Cultural Institute and also the Poland Museum in Warsaw, Poland, which is a museum sort of dedicated to the lives of Polish Jews in Warsaw. So that is a big part of my time. We're in the final stages. It's all written, it's all choreographed and all directed, and we're really just doing kind of final polishing of it for a premiere, a set of workshop premieres in the spring. I also wrote a zine a year ago where I sort of like made scores that were really easily playable. And actually, you can find a copy of this on my website. I put it up for free. The intention was during COVID, I felt so sad that I couldn't connect with other people to make music, because ultimately that's what led me into making music, was the connection that I had between other people, and the feeling that I had in choirs so many years ago of taking a breath together and then we all sing together, and that connection that I felt. And through COVID, I felt so isolated in making music, and it's been so hard to make music because I'm not with other people making music. So I made a zine. That was my sort of goal, was to create some sort of like digital virtual connection. And it's a zine of really super short, super easy pieces. The idea was that anyone could play them. Even if you could play recorder, you could probably kind of figure this out. And the idea was I shipped it all across the country, and honestly all across the world. I shipped it to Poland and Germany and the Netherlands and even to Australia. And I had people play the songs and then upload them to a Google Drive and kind of record their thoughts. It was also a journal, or this zine you could color in. So you could write your own thoughts and write your own feelings, and it's available online if you want to check it out. Please don't pay for it. It's all about just connection and being together. So it's important to me that you just take your time and do it. So those are kind of the major things in my life. The fact that I'm a grad student, I'm a teaching artist. I have this awesome band called Tender Heart Bitches, which is all my music, and then continuing to write opera. I'm also currently working, my sort of new wave of myself as a composer is that I'm doing a lot of hybrid graphic scores. So I'll write pieces in traditional notation, but then go into Photoshop and kind of create colored lines and shapes and things to add texture to the music. And I'm really excited about a string quartet that I'm working on right now, where the score is in GIF format or GIF format. I really don't know what people are saying, but I call them GIFs. So it's GIF format. So the score, while the notes stay the same, all of the colored portions are kind of shimmering and glittering. It's really cool. I'm still working on that though, so it's nowhere to be found, but you can ask me about it a little later. Okay, the next question is, tell us about your identifiers. So I identify as a woman. I definitely feel like queerness is a big part of my identity, both as a queer woman in a queer relationship, and also, queerness in gender. I really feel like womanhood does not completely describe who I am. Although I am comfortable with she, her pronouns, I definitely feel like womanhood is something that was placed on me, but I don't know if that's how I would describe myself all the time. I'm definitely interested in femininity, but gender is complicated. I'm still figuring it out. I come from a pretty privileged family. Both my parents, are upper middle class, and, went to a private liberal arts college. But, I definitely am not interested in well, the kind of the complicated thing, and I'll just be honest, since my goal here is transparency, is, I don't have any financial connection to my parents. And that's because of queerness. It's been a challenge. So I'm, financially independent, and yeah. I'm also chronically ill. I'm not going to talk about my specific diagnoses, but I'm pretty seriously chronically ill. I do qualify as disabled, although I don't always claim that term, because it doesn't impact my life as much as it once did. When I was a kid, it really impacted me. Now, I have a lot of issues, but I find they're really managed because I have been sick for so long. What else about me? I'm white, but my mother is from an immigrant family. My mom is from Poland. I grew up speaking Polish with my grandparents, but I don't really speak it anymore at all, because my mom didn't really want to speak Polish with me. But I did speak it with my grandparents. Anyway, tell us about your life. And it says sad stuff goes here too if you want. So I feel like I've already been kind of sad, but I think I'll go into it a little bit more. So, I am an independent artist. I am on my own in a lot of ways. Economically, I'm on my own. Artistically, I tend to be on my own. My family definitely doesn't understand what I do, but I love what I do. I'm really happy doing it. I definitely feel like, sorry, there's an ambulance going by, but I definitely feel like what I'm doing is really important to me, and living my life, in a way that brings me joy is really important. And my family doesn't necessarily understand it, and that's okay because I'm pretty happy. I'm in school. It's really challenging to juggle both school and being an artist, and working full time. A lot of my colleagues in school, they don't work jobs. That's what I'm learning in grad school. A lot of people don't work jobs, but I'm working 6 different jobs and taking classes and playing with my band. So it's a lot. And I'm definitely feeling it in the transition between, just working and making music to working, making music, and being a student. It's definitely a challenge, but I feel really supported by my partner, who I live with in this apartment in Brooklyn. We also have a really great dog. His name is Lundy. He's great. I was checking to see if he was asleep so I could show him, but he's probably in the other room. He's a senior Scottish Terrier, Cairn Terrier, we think. We adopted him about 9 months ago, and he's the best. So although my life is really hectic and chaotic, and I don't receive a lot of support from my family or from institutions, that's another thing that has been very hard, is when you straddle multiple worlds and when you make music that is outside of the boxes that people are interested in, you tend to not get a lot of institutional support until you make a name for yourself. And that's what I'm working on right now. If I were making very traditional classical music, I probably would get programmed a lot more, but I don't. And I'm really interested in staying true to myself and true to my artistic vision. So, you win some, you lose some. But anyway, all of those difficulties aside, I feel very supported by my partner, by having such a wonderful home. I also have really supportive friends. A lot of my friends I have a really, really good friend who's a lawyer. He's my best friend from childhood. And it's really fun to have a non-musician best friend because I can just leave my life at the door and just have fun. And that's really great. But I'd say the rest of my friends are primarily musicians, and that's also really important because they know what I'm going through. For example, I just released my debut EP, High Kicks, with my band Tender Heart Bitches. You can find us on Spotify, on Bandcamp, really wherever you get music. And I noticed that I was really sad after I released the EP, and supposedly this is a very normal thing, is it's like kind of like you release it and then, you know, it's this huge emotional push to release music and tell people about it and be like, hey, I'm about to release this, and post about it on the internet, and then once it happens, it just goes away and it feels really sad and lonely. And also, you know, the EP is kind of my like deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings from when I was coming out, so it's pretty vulnerable material. And you know, it was hard to have that in the hands of anyone. Although I think that's the most, you know, I think the most important thing is that anyone can listen to it. And I'm just hoping that like someone out in Missouri, like out in the middle of the country, who like needs to hear the story of like a queer person having a hard time and being okay, learning to be okay, even though they're having a hard time. Like, that's what I'm doing it for. But the fact that, you know, people who don't understand what I'm doing can also hear it too, kind of stinks, but it's part of the material. You know, also the part that, you know, my family can hear it is hard. I know there are family members of mine who will not listen to it, and that's fine. I'm fine with that. Anyway, that was tell us about your life. Sad stuff goes here too if you want. Tell us about composing as a person of marginalized identity. Yeah, so I think that is one of the hardest parts of being a composer. You do not see a lot of people that are not white, cis men in composition. I'm grateful that I've filled my life with people who are not that. It's very hard. We're very tokenized. You know, if I'm never programmed, and then I'm like programmed all the time in March for Women's History Month. You know, that's hard. And I'm programmed all the time during Pride Month too. It's hard to feel like the only reason people care about me is because I'm marginalized and not because of the music I make. But I have to say, like, one of my biggest driving forces is that I feel like if I stop composing, if I stop making music, if I stop like unabashedly being myself in my music and in my art, that maybe, and I know this is silly, but maybe there's some young queer person younger than myself who is looking at me and thinking, wow, if she can do it, then I can do it. And I can't stop for that person. Even if it's one person, it's not enough for me to stop. No matter how hard it gets, like, I'm always really thinking of the people who will come after me, and how there are so many composers who have inspired me to keep going, who are older than me, or, you know, even well beyond me. You know, I think of people like Hildegard von Bingen. I actually have a tattoo of Hildegard von Bingen. And I think of, you know, modern day composers like Caroline Shaw. I think of how hard they're working and how amazing they're doing. And they inspire me to keep going even when things feel hard and bleak and difficult. And I just think about the fact that there's totally a kid out there that if I stop, they'll think maybe I should stop too. Maybe it's not worth it. And that keeps me going every single day. Anything else? I think I've told you my life story, but just know you can always reach out to me if you have more questions, or if you just want to get to know me. My Instagram handle is @OrpheusWannabe. Orpheus like the Greek myth, wannabe like the Spice Girls song. And you can find my band online, Tender Heart Bitches, anywhere. And you can find my music at jlcomposes.com. But if you are interested in my music, or if you're interested in me, if you just want to talk, if you're whatever, I'm really open. And so, feel free to send me a DM, send me an email. I'll always try and read it. You know how busy I am, so I might not get to it right away. But I'm always here to answer questions and whatever, really. Fast forward 3 years, what would you like to see in the classical music world? Wow. Obviously more representation, and more support of artists. But the most important thing is like to see in 3 years, if I can see, half of the dead white male composers that I see replaced by people from marginalized identities, I will really feel like there's success. I don't know if that will happen. Classical music moves it's one of the slowest fields to move in the direction of progress. But really, in 3 years, what would be the dream for me is to see like young POC kids, to see young queer kids, to see young people of intersecting marginalized identities having the courage to tell their story and make music. Like, I'll be happy and I'll feel fulfilled. It's also not about me, but I think progress is just seeing people unafraid to tell their stories, even though people are telling them that their stories don't matter. That's progress to me. That's it. If you have any more questions, like I said, you can DM me at Orpheus Wannabe on Twitter, on Instagram, and then you can also email me. My email should be on my website at jlcomposes.com. I'm an open book. I'm always here to talk. Even if you just have questions, even if you just need advice, even if you just want to say hi, more than happy to say hi. And I just want to thank you so much for having me today. And this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And have a great rest of your day.